Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today we'll be covering the weather for April 8th of 2024. Currently, we have an enhanced risk for northern Texas into northwestern Louisiana there. Threats for today do include a 5% tornado risk where we could see the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region, a 15% damaging wind risk where we could see the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts with some storms. And then as for our hail risk, we do have a 30% with the hashed area, indicating the potential of some massive hailstones and some gorilla hail, which could potentially reach sizes upwards of 1 inch in diameter or greater. So this is going to be the primary driver for the enhanced risk region and the primary risk that we are going to be covering, but we will also go over our tornado risk and our damaging wind risk as well. Taking a look at our day 2 outlook for tomorrow, we do have a enhanced risk for eastern Texas into western Louisiana there, as well as a smaller marginal threat for portions of northwestern Ohio and western Pennsylvania there. As for the enhanced risk further down to the south, we do have a 10% tornado risk for eastern Texas into western Louisiana in the hashed area, indicating that we could see the potential for some significant tornadoes. We are definitely watching for the potential of a conditional tornado outbreak tomorrow, and I will likely go live for this event if I have time. Taking a look at our damaging wind risk, we do have a 30% wind risk for the enhanced risk area, as well as a 5% wind risk for the marginal threat further up north. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 30% with the hashed area, indicating that we may be able to see the potential of some gorilla hail tomorrow as well. As for our day 3 outlook, we do have a 30% probabilistic hash area where we could see the potential for some significant severe thunderstorms for Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and southwestern Alabama, as well as an enhanced risk for that region. Again, we could see the potential for some significant severe thunderstorms there as well. And then for day 4 to day 8 outlook, for day 4 outlook, we do have a dual 15%, which I haven't seen on our day 4 to day 8 outlook ever before. So this is quite a rare phenomenon to see, but we do have a 15% for Ohio, northeastern Kentucky, and western West Virginia, as well as the 15% that extends from southern North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, southeastern Alabama, and northern Florida there, where we could be watching for the potential of overall a lower end risk for severe thunderstorms, but maybe some significant severe thunderstorms. And then outside of our day 4 outlook, we don't have any areas that are currently issued. Taking a look at our WPC outlook, starting off with our excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we do have a slight risk for southern Arkansas, western Mississippi, northern Louisiana, southern Oklahoma, and eastern Texas, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding for today. For tomorrow, we do have a moderate risk for flash flooding for southern Arkansas, western Mississippi, northern Louisiana, and eastern Texas, where we could see the potential for some widespread flash flooding and potentially some isolated significant flash flooding in the region of concern. And then we do have a pretty large slight risk that does extend all the way from New Mexico into portions of western Tennessee and western Kentucky. Then for our day 3 outlook, we do have another moderate risk for Alabama into portions and parts of Mississippi, where we could see again the potential for some widespread flash flooding, some of which could potentially be significant. And then for our winter weather outlooks for today, we aren't really watching for anywhere that we're going to see the potential for some heavy snowfall. However, we may be able to see the potential for some heavy snowfall for some elevated regions of the Rockies. However, we shouldn't really see too much of it. And then for our day 2 outlook for tomorrow, we currently don't have any areas issued for the potential for heavy snowfall. Same with our day 3 outlook. We do have a area for Canada there, but we don't have any areas in the United States. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observation, and how that's going to work in conjunction to lead to our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Starting off with our upper level pattern here, we do have a upper level low that is currently situated across the southwestern United States. This is currently positively tilted. However, this upper level low will likely slowly transition eastward and become negatively tilted over the next couple of days, and lead to the risk for severe thunderstorms further eastward. However, for today, we do have a pretty broad jet advecting out of that low pressure system and working in conjunction with our subtropical jet with our 500 millibar jet upwards of 500 miles per hour. Sorry, 50 miles per hour, and potentially upwards of 60 miles per hour as well, which will definitely provide us with potentially some pretty decent speed here, and that will definitely be supportive of the risk for some massive hail, as well as support our risk for severe thunderstorms in general. And then as far as our surface observations, we are seeing quite a lot of warm air advection out of the Gulf of Mexico, and that is leading to a warm front. And we also do have a dry line that is back into western Texas here. This will likely push eastward over the next couple of hours and potentially trigger severe thunderstorms. Storms are expected to be pretty messy in this region of concern. We may be able to see storms that may fire off along the warm front, may see storms that may fire off along the dry line, and then we may also just see storms that may just fire off of warm air advection. It's going to be extremely messy across this region, so we could see potentially some pretty messy storms depending on where they want to fire off of. We do have some storms that are currently ongoing that are mainly off of warm air advection. We actually do have a tornado warning and a tornado watch currently ongoing, so this is currently an ongoing threat. However, we are expected to see upscale growth over the next couple of hours as the threat has overall just begun for tonight. Taking a look at our low-level jet and how that's going to support the risk for tornadoes across this region and how that's going to affect our directional shear, we are expected to see a pretty decent low-level jet, mainly towards the eastern half of the risk, mainly across eastern Texas into Louisiana. However, we do have a 5% tornado risk that does extend into the more westward in the enhanced risk area. However, we are expected to see a pretty decent, pretty beefy low-level jet out of the southwest, upwards of 40 to 50 miles per hour at 850 millibars, which will supply us with quite a lot of speed shear across this region. We should definitely see some pretty big speed shear values across this region that will definitely be supportive of the potential for tornadoes. And then regarding our instability, I think we may be able to see the potential for a conditional strong tornado across this region. However, our risk for tornadoes is going to be a little bit more on the limited end, but we could definitely see the potential for tornadoes across this region. And then we also may get another swath here, another weaker low-level jet further up to the north that may be supportive of a 5% tornado risk further up to the north there, supply the region with some pretty decent directional shear, and support the potential for a couple of tornadoes for some of the storms that may be further up to the east, even if it is going to be mainly separated, to the west, if it is going to be mainly separated from our actual low-level jet here. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect our speed shear and the risk for hail, as well as our defluence. What we're looking for as far as our defluence is the spreading of our wind vectors, and what that will do is that will create a void in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that will cause the mid levels and our low levels to rise to fill that space in the upper levels as the atmosphere is a gas and it was to achieve equilibrium, and that will lead to very, very strong, very widespread lift across the regions that we do see defluence. And it does look like we may be able to see maybe some more subtle spreading of the isobars and wind vectors. It is kind of noticeable. It is a little bit more on the subtle end, but we could definitely see a mass response and quite a lot of lift across this region, and that may overall lead to sort of a more messy risk with especially what's already ongoing with our mess of our warm front and our dry line and storms that are currently ongoing in warm air advection. That defluence is not really going to help whatsoever. That's going to lead to overall much more messy storms. However, as far as our 200 millibar jet streak, we do see speed shear values, 200 millibar flow values upwards of 100 knots, 105, 107 knots, which will definitely support quite a lot of speed shear across this region and the potential for some massive hail. Taking a look at both of our shear parameters, starting off with our storm relative helicity and our directional shear and how that's going to affect our tornado risk across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of storm relative helicity across this region with storm relative helicity values that may be able to get upwards of 300, which is definitely fairly modest and will support a pretty decent tornado risk across this region. And that will continue to increase into the late afternoon in the very early morning of tomorrow, with values that could potentially get upwards of 500 meters squared to second squared of storm relative velocity. However, this will also be when convective inhibition is increased, daytime heating is lost, and there will be a much limited risk for tornadoes. Meteorologically, more convective inhibition, and overall there will be less of a potential for tornadoes as after the sun sets, but we will have much greater shear. But overall, I think it balances out to what the SPC currently has issued as far as the tornado risk. And then further off to the west, we do have a pretty big swath of some pretty strong storm relative velocity values as well, that are going to be supportive of the potential of a couple of tornadoes that may potentially be further off to the west, with another cluster of storms that may fire off towards northwestern Texas, northern Texas, and southern Oklahoma. Taking a look at our bulk shear values and how that's going to affect our hail risk across this region, we are expected to see quite strong bulk shear values across this region, with values that may potentially be able to get upwards of 50 to 60 knots of speed shear, or bulk shear at or 0 to 6 kilometers. And that will definitely support the potential for some pretty massive hailstones across this region, and especially with the instability that we're going to have in place, we could definitely see the potential for some gorilla hail. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, going over our general radar analysis as well as our timing for our storms. As of right now, we do have some cells that are currently ongoing that are exhibiting some tornado potential, and we did have a tornado warning for one of them already. However, over the next couple of hours, as storms move into the enhanced risk area, we are expected to see upscale growth and overall much more widespread storms and much more robust storms, with a line of very heavy rainfall with some embedded hail and the potential for embedded tornadoes that will likely propagate eastward, with updrafts being further down to the south that will also move eastward with the line. But the line itself will likely move off to the north or stay mainly stationary. However, that setup for storms is really bad for overall tornado potential, and will be very limiting and support a much lower end risk for tornadoes. We shouldn't see too much of a risk for significant tornadoes. I definitely do think that a potentially a conditional significant tornado or two may be possible. However, I think the overall risk for a significant tornado is going to be much lower, and I do think that the SPC is doing a really good job is keeping that with the 5% tornado risk, especially with the uncertainty that we have in place, with models having absolutely awful agreements for today's setup. And then further off to the west, we are expected to see potentially more of an isolated, and then also, again, still a messy setup with some more isolated cells that may fire off towards northwestern Texas into southern Oklahoma. And those will likely become pretty messy pretty quickly, as we may be able to see some development fire off along that dry line. Taking a look at our dew points, we're going to be starting to take a look at the environment that storms are expected to be in, and our instability that's going to fuel our storms. In our warm sector, we are expected to see, again, quite a lot of warm air advection out of the south here, and that will support quite a lot of moisture, with dew point values that may be able to get upwards of the 70s, the low 70s, and range anywhere from the low 70s to the upper and mid 60s, which will definitely support the potential for quite a lot of instability across this region. We haven't seen dew points that were getting upwards of the 70s across a broad warm sector like this, and affect the risk for severe thunderstorms outside of maybe Florida, I think, since last year. I can't recall any other risks that have had dew points this high that would have directly impacted our storms outside of Florida since last year. So again, we are gonna see a very large amount of moisture across this region that will potentially support a very large amount of instability as well. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to work in conjunction with our dew points, as well as our lapse rates later in our convective inhibition for our instability, we are expected to see quite a lot of heat across this region, with peak daytime heating that may be able to support temperatures upwards of the upper 70s to the low 80s, which will definitely support the potential for quite a lot of instability, especially on top of the very immense amount of moisture that we have across this region. We could definitely see a very large amount of instability come out of this as a result. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability and the risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rates on the southern end of storms, with lapse rates that may be able to get upwards of 7 to 8. However, it does look like storms are probably going to be mainly around this region, which may not be too affected by the stronger lapse rates further down to the south. However, across this region, we should see some pretty decent lapse rates that should definitely lead to some pretty strong instability and support a risk for some massive hail and massively help with the potential for a large hail across this region. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperature as well as our convective inhibition, how that's going to help our instability as well as how that's going to affect our storms across this region. Storms are currently firing off in the warm sector in a region where there is no convective inhibition, but we do have a warm air advection out of the south, which may limit our storms potentially, as that will introduce a little bit of an elevated mixed layer. However, as time goes on and the sun sets, we are expected to see a rapid increase in convective inhibition across the warm sector, which will likely lead to a significantly lower end risk for severe thunderstorms into the late afternoon and very early morning hours of tomorrow. This will also be when the low-level jet is at its maximum and begins to strengthen and supports much greater storm-related felicity values across this region. However, with the newly introduced convective inhibition, there won't really be all that much possibility for storms to really tap into that surface layer and spin up to provide a much greater tornado risk with that much greater storm-related felicity that's going to be introduced. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms. Storms are currently ongoing, and we are expected to continue to see some pretty big upscale growth as time goes forward and as storms move northward. And we are expected to see a very large amount of instability to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms, with values that may be able to range around the mid 2000s, which will definitely be ample enough to fuel the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region, especially with the storm-related felicity that we have. And with our lapse rates and our speed share, we could definitely see the potential for some massive hailstones with some of these severe thunderstorms. And then we could also see the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts across this region as well. Taking a look at our surface instability and how that's going to fuel the risk for surface-based storms, I don't really have all that much to say, but it does look like our most unstable cape is going to translate down to our surface, which will allow for the potential of surface-based storms and the potential for surface-based rotation, the potential for tornadoes. If we didn't have our surface-based instability, we would still see the potential for damaging wind gusts and large hail. However, with our very strong surface instability, we will see the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of 0 to 3 kilometer instability ahead of storms, but that will likely weaken and clear out as we see massive upscale growth in our main convective line further across, further down to the south and eastward across Texas here. We should still see some pretty decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability values across this area, which may definitely be able to help aid in the risk for severe thunderstorms, and we could definitely see quite a lot of low-level aid come out of that. Taking a look at our energy elasticity index values and how that's going to show our risk for tornadoes for today. Again, we are expected to see some pretty decent storm-related felicity values before our low-level jet increases upwards of 200 meters squared, second squared of storm-related felicity, and then a really strong most unstable cape and surface cape, which will support the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region with energy elasticity index values upwards of 2 to 1 in a very widespread area, which is definitely in line with most 5% tornado risk. And we could definitely see the potential for a few tornadoes with a couple of tornadoes with some of these storms. Taking a look at our meso-analysis page for our risk for hail for today, you can see that we have some really big areas for our large hail parameter, very indicative of the potential for some very large hail, very widespread hail, and potentially some significant hail as well. I'm going to skip over our damaging wind gust models for today. If you couldn't tell, I'm mentally exhausted. and I honestly just can't get it in me to put in the effort for our damaging wind gusts. But for our SARS hail size, you can see very widespread areas indicating the potential for at least some hail, with some areas that are getting up to 4 inches, but mainly it is staying around 3 to 2.75 inches. I would like to know how the SARS hail size actually figures out like what it's doing and how I can understand it better. And then for our significant hail, you can see that we do have a 4 and a 3 for the Arklatex region, as well as an isolated 3 there, indicating that we may be able to see the potential for some significant hail. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay with it for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast, or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are JaxonWX, One Nation Weather, and Weather Watcher. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.